Good afternoon, my friends. It's not morning, as most of you know. It's the afternoon. I had some things to do this morning. Right now, I'm having a nice ginger tea to, just sort of clear out my sinuses and all of that good stuff. As everyone's aware of, you have this big coronavirus going around that people are, massively afraid of. And I thought I'd share some thoughts about that issue. And I'll sort of relay it to my personal views as to why, the coronavirus happens to begin with, or things like the coronavirus always happens. And this is one of the main reasons, not one of the main reasons, but it's definitely one of them as to why I keep a kosher diet. It's something that I've been doing maybe a little more than half a year. I think maybe even a full year at this point. It's not something I'm extremely strict about. I don't necessarily think that it's something you need to be super adamant about and making sure everything's perfect and making sure that you're using like special plates and all the stuff, which a lot of like conservative Jews are very big about, it being like making sure they're keeping the kosher diet. To me, it's kind of like one of the minor things. Like if you're going outside and you see someone driving like a Ferrari, and you get like this like inner like hatred inside of you because you're jealous, because you think like, oh fuck that guy, like what does he do, he doesn't deserve that Ferrari, I deserve it, blah 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 blah. Is infinitely worse than not keeping the kosher diet. If you keep a kosher diet and keep it clean or whatever, and you do something like that, it's not going to mean shit, because that's a bigger sin, so to speak. So the main reason why I keep kosher, though, is because it is a disciplinary aspect of your diet, which you can expand further out and, creating discipline for yourself and what you want to eat. And if you want to eat healthily, I think when we live in a world where we don't have that set of restrictions or that discipline, we can easily just eat whatever the hell we want and not feel guilty about it. Eat like bacon and pork every day and eat whatever you want from the forest or what have you. When you keep a kosher diet, it really restricts you in a certain sense of having to eat certain things and not indulging in other aspects which aren't even healthy for you to begin with. When we look at the kosher diet, the foods that are not kosher are generally unhealthy for you, and this includes pork products, this includes shellfish, anything like that. They all are loaded with bad cholesterols, bad fats. It's just generally unhealthy food. If we go even further and talking about the coronavirus, for instance, if you notice a lot of these diseases that have been popping up, just throughout history, a lot of them are coming, let's just say from China. Not all the time, but sometimes they do. Sometimes they're from Africa with Ebola. And the thing that these to have in common is that they are generally very free in terms of what they are eating. They don't really put any restrictions culturally on terms of what they can eat. They have the coronavirus, which came, allegedly from someone eating bats. Something definitely not kosher. Even on, if you're just a normal Christian who eats pork, you think eating bats is kind of like, oh, that's kind of gross. That's kind of fucked up. And it's, it's an internal thing that you realize that eating that kind of food that, isn't clean spiritually or what have you, it's going to lead to diseases at one point. All of these diseases have arisen from an unclean diet. It's no surprise that there aren't many diseases like this. I don't think there's any disease really that's come from cows or chickens. The only exception would be like mad cow disease or the avian flu, both of which are coming from other reasons not pertaining to just the fact that they're eating those products. Mad cow disease came because they were literally feeding, rotting corpses of other cows to cows. I mean, it's like you're already doing something fucked up, which is like forcing cannibalism on these animals, and at the same time you're not even using good animal carcasses, using like this rotting, disgusting, diseased flesh, and that's what they're consuming. So obviously there's going to be a disease from that. It doesn't matter if the animal is kosher or not or what have you. And the same thing with chickens. The only thing that came from the avian flu was from other birds, from other wildlife, from other, birds coming into contact with the chickens, which even then, it's not even a big deal. It's never been a pandemonium or a scare from the avian flu. It's been kind of like a mild concern at best. But the main, scares in terms of public health and public viruses, they always come from non-kosher animals, which is something to think about, especially as we sort of become very secular and try to avoid traditional religion and think that it's entirely wrong, that there might actually be something there to think about, that eating non-kosher foods is not exactly, healthy for us in the long term. I mean, we look at the swine flu outbreak that happened about 12 years ago, that came from pigs. And even pigs are going through a virus at the moment in China, which is unrelated to coronavirus. And thankfully, it's not transmissible to humans, but it's still affecting them altogether. And it could easily mutate and be transferable to humans. And this could easily be avoided by not consuming pork products, period. And this goes for any sort of food or meat product that, isn't kosher. And I'm going to go back on the chicken with the avian flu. And the reason why I think that happens is because a lot of these chickens are genetically modified, like literally, they're genetically modified to be different than what a traditional bird looks like. And they're also pumped with tons of antibiotics, which wreaks havoc on their immune system. That's why you can't eat, chicken raw anymore. You have to cook it all the way through because it's loaded with bacteria that's arisen over time from the use of antibiotics. So, it's obvious that their immune systems are always compromised and they live in horrible conditions. So the fact that there is a disease like the avian flu doesn't really surprise me, because there's more to this, just having the kosher meat as a species. It comes from the actual treatment of the animals. For instance, there isn't many diseases that are being spread by deer, for instance. The only difference is Lyme disease that come from ticks, which is a man-made disease to begin with, and it's not coming from the deer, it's coming from the little spider thing that's on top of it, which is, deer and deer-like animals like elk or whatever, those are kosher meats. So even giraffe is kosher, ironically. So it's better to eat a giraffe than it is to eat bacon every morning, in my opinion. But I also want to emphasize that this isn't something that I generally follow on a strict basis. I've already mentioned that. It's not something that's like, my highest pursuit of my spiritual quest. I read through the Torah. I read through the entire Bible, actually. And, it was just something in there that I thought, what, I'll try this out, see how I feel. And I generally felt better. I generally felt cleaner in a broad sense of that word. When I would eat pork products, I noticed even before I went kosher and I kind of just ignored it, that when I would eat like a heavy pork product meal, whether that's bacon or anything, I always felt heavy afterwards. There was always this heaviness inside of me. It's like my brain was sort of foggy after eating it, like I would eat at a ramen restaurant, right? And it's really good quality ramen. It's pork broth, and I just felt heavy afterwards. Like I just felt like, I'm just kind of like, not to be dramatic, but it was just like a very subtle thing that lasted, for several hours. And it doesn't happen every time I eat pork, but it's definitely noticeable to the point where I was like, okay, there is a difference between how I feel physically when I don't eat pork products. And, there's plenty of other non-kosher meats, but I don't really eat a lot of stuff. Most of the food you're going to buy in the grocery store is from a kosher animal, and that's usually beef or chicken or fish. And the only other exceptions are like oysters and shellfish and pork. And then everything other than that is just weird shit like rabbit or horse meat or a dog meat if you're in Korea. It's just all weird stuff that in the Western world we don't really find ourselves familiar with finding in a grocery store. So it's pretty easy to be kosher unless you're very conservative and you're very strict and you want to have the special kosher meals. Um, I will also add that I don't follow the eating meat with milk rule. I don't think that's in line with the actual law of the Torah. In the Torah, it says, "Thou shalt not cook a babe in its mother's milk." That's a very broad statement, especially when it's very clear and precise in terms of what you can and cannot eat. It goes on to say before that, it's like, okay, don't eat this animal. There are 4 types of animals that have these qualities that you should avoid, even though they have similar qualities to the kosher animal. There's 2 main determiners: is that they have to have a cloven foot and they have to chew their own cud. It's very specific in terms of what you can and cannot eat. And then you just have this one-liner, which isn't in that section, by the way. It's in a separate section altogether, that says, "Thou shalt not cook a babe in its mother's milk." This is in the ritual sacrifice portion of the text when they're explaining about what to do. When you're doing a burning sacrifice. This is what people did back in the day. No one really does that anymore, but back in the day, if you want to do a ritual sacrifice, it clearly stated, don't burn a babe in its mother's milk, and don't slaughter your infant children. That was a big thing back in the day. People did that, and the Bible literally had to tell people, don't do that. So, people who have a problem with religion, just remember where we came from. Like, the world was really fucked up. There wasn't a moral compass that we were following, So, some good tea. So, keep that in mind. I think the reason why it's become such an important placeholder in Jewish law in the Talmud is they're just playing safe, right? Why take the risk of eating milk and meat if there's a chance it's not kosher, right? So that's the big thing. I personally don't abide by it. I'd rather stick to the avoiding these animals because it makes a lot more sense. Even still, I've never cooked meat in actual milk before. I've made cheese, which is a little bit different, obviously. And you're not even really cooking it. You're just, you make a cheeseburger, you put the cheese on top after the burger's cooked. So you're not really cooking it within. It's not being melded together. So it's a very weird sort of law. And at the same time, it's like a babe in its mother's milk. Are you using veal and then using the literal milk from that veal's mother to cook it in? Is there a placeholder on that law? So it's kind of very fuzzy and not very clear. And it's something I generally tend not to focus on because a lot of the laws that are in the Torah are pretty damn clear. Like, don't kill anyone. Don't be jealous of your neighbor. Don't worship idols. If you jack off, wait a week and then you'll be clean again. Like, that's literally in the Bible. Or the Torah, I should specify. So a lot of these things are very cut and dry, and this is the one law that's kind of like, okay, like, what does that mean exactly? Like, if it said do not drink milk with meat, that would solve everything. It would be very clear. But since it's in this very mysterious concept or very mysterious wording where you don't really know what it means, it's important to understand that. So that's basically what my thoughts on being kosher and living a kosher lifestyle is. I don't really take it super strictly. I don't abide by it as the main mode of living. It's just something I generally follow. And if there comes a time where I'm at a friend's house or a family gathering and they're serving a pork product, I'll eat it because it's there and they put work and time, and I'm not going to be rude and say, oh, I don't eat this, because I think it's more important to respect people and respect what people want to give you. The only difference is obviously if you have like a severe allergy or you're going through some shit, I don't know. But generally these kosher laws that are put into place, they're just sort of modes to live by, and people need to understand that like humans are going to sin. People are going to do wrong. That's part of the human experience. And these are generally things that, in terms of following on a strict basis, it's like, okay, like it's kind of not that important. It's kind of like speeding on the highway where it's like, yeah, you shouldn't do that. It's, just be careful because, like I said, you see all these diseases are coming from these non-kosher animals. AIDS came from a monkey. So, people want to say that it's some government conspiracy or what have you. I personally don't really abide by that. I don't really think being afraid of some weird new world order by implanting viruses to make people sick is kind of counterproductive for the elite, because they could easily be the ones who are infected by that same disease. So anyway, to top it off, the coronavirus I'm not really that concerned about. There's a lot of fear that's being propagated, and people are saying that it's like, oh, they're trying to cover it up and make it seem like it's not as bad as it actually is. I see a lot of contrary evidence to that. If you go anywhere on the internet, there's going to be like a coronavirus article that's being pumped in your face of why you should be afraid of this. Whereas if you're actually talking to health practitioners and doctors, they're pretty chill about it. Like, they're concerned, but they're like, we've done this before. We went through SARS. We went through this. It's going to be a little bit harder because the symptoms aren't showing up as quickly as SARS, and you're still contagious when you're not showing symptoms. So that's an issue. But overall, I'm not really that concerned about it. Especially, people like to look at Wuhan as being closed off. People need to realize that China is not fully developed as a country. It looks like that on the surface because they're very, very adamant about their presentation as a country, as a nation, that they're super developed, they're super ahead of the game, their cities are on top of the world. And, if you go to Shanghai, Beijing, Hong Kong's not really part of China, but we'll include it anyway. People like to think of those cities as like, oh yeah, this is what China's like. And it's like the first world. If you ever been to Shanghai, it's like going to Toronto, New York City, Los Angeles. It's like a big metropolis, very modern. But that's all very surface. If you actually go outside those cities and go to the smaller cities, you'll actually see that the living conditions become more and more derelict, more sort of rustic, I guess you could say. A lot of cities are also still developed, but the same time, like, China is not a fully developed country as much as it likes to present itself that way. So when we see that there's a lot of issues with this health crisis that's going on, we have to realize that it's happening in a world where they are not fully developed in that way. In China, like in the 1980s, it wasn't like the 80s that it was here in the West, where the 80s we sort of picture as being like, yeah, it was like, normal. It was like a city. We just didn't have internet or cell phones or anything like that. China in the 80s, everyone was on like dirt roads and, rode horses. I mean, it was fucking backwards. Like, the country back then was not the same. It's expanded ridiculously fast and has grown exponentially. And, people need to take that into account, that they're not equipped to deal with these situations as much as the Western world is, because we have been doing this a lot longer. We have dealt with, modern viruses for a lot longer. We know what to do with them. China, it's still learning that process a little bit more. They also have a lot more people. So, and they're all jam-packed together, and they're eating non-kosher foods, which these diseases are easier to spread through. So there's a lot of factors coming into this. Also, the air quality. Think about they have a respiratory disease that's being spread around. Think of the air quality in China. It's horrible. Already, just living like that, and you're a normal, healthy person, it's going to have an effect on your health, regardless of a disease. If you have this influenza disease, couple that with the poor air quality that's just in a lot of these cities, it's going to be a huge problem. It's going to escalate the symptoms of the disease much more. It's going to make them worse. It's going to be a lot harder to heal, because these people can't even breathe proper air. So, keep that in mind as well, that we are privileged to live in the Western world where our air quality is like exceptionally better. So that's about it. That's my main thoughts on the topic. And I'll try to keep doing more videos more consistently as time goes on. And I'll see you next time. Peace.